There are many games that people know to be the hardest game ever made, or extremely hard game don't play, such as Elden Ring or Celeste. Those games are nothing in comparison to the game I'm going to talk about. This game is so much harder than any other game, it's not even close. Even the less known games like Spelunky 2 or The End is Nigh have nothing on this game. And the game that I'm talking about is Crypt of the NecroDancer.
Yes! Yes! I fucking did it! Yes! 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 I did it! I did it! I did it! Oh my god! I did it! I did it! Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god!
There is no game that even comes close to the difficulty of Crypt. As a completionist, wanting to 100% this game was without a doubt one of the hardest decisions I've ever chose to make, and I'm not even close to being done with it. Let me stop exaggerating the difficulty of the game and get into why it's so hard. Let's start with the game itself. The game and the 2 gameplay DLCs are about $30 USD, which is pretty reasonable. However, when the game goes on sale, which it does a lot, the game goes down to about $3 like for the base game, and then if you count the DLC, it's about $13. And for how much is in this game, what you're getting for $13 is an absolute steal. Launching the game, we're met with the story. He plays Cadence, a girl who lost her father a while back because of her mother's death. She knows where he went though, and has wanted to go there multiple times, but her grandfather Eli has told her not to as many times as she's wanted to go. She finally tells him that she doesn't care, and she's going down regardless. Upon falling into the crypt, she has her heart stolen by the NecroDancer, putting her under a curse. She's now forced to venture through the crypt and get all the way to the bottom to retrieve her heart and hopefully her father. Completely neglecting the story now, because it doesn't really have much of a hold on the gameplay for the most part, we get into the actual gameplay. The tutorial tells us that every enemy has a pattern, and if we learn those patterns, we'll be completely fine. For example, this skeleton puts his hands up before he moves, and there are many traps that exist here, which we will need to be looking out for. But, mainly, we need to be paying attention 100% of the time to the bars at the bottom. These bars represent the tempo of the song that's playing, or BPM as I'm going to be calling it. Both you and the enemies can only act whenever the 2 bars hit each other, making the gameplay a dance of death. The gameplay is pretty straightforward. You have a dagger, a shovel, and a will to get to the bottom of this. The only issue is that you probably suck at this game, missing every other beat, dying to every enemy, etc. This game consists of 5 zones, each of them with different enemies than the zones previous, and a boss at the end of them. You can either do these zones one by one but to practice, or go into all zones mode where you have to do all 5 of them in a row. To 100% the game, you need to complete all the zones on every character. Before I talk about the characters though, I'm going to go over all the zones and get you familiar with what's going to happen in them. We start in Zone 1, a place made of pretty much dirt and a couple stones, with a bunch of enemies that usually aren't that bad. Sometimes you can get cornered by them, but usually it's not that bad. Each level has a mini-boss at the end of it, and with Zone 1, they usually aren't that hard. Zone 2 is a bit different though. The dirt becomes a bit more grassy, and you're in more of a foresty setting. The enemies get a little bit harder, and you'll need to be a bit more focused. Then comes the hardest zone, in my opinion, the third one. There's 2 sections to each level, a hot section and a cold section. The cool thing is that whenever you go from the hot side to the cold side, there is a different song that starts playing that has the same melodies and the same everything to it, but just a different feel to it. The colder side, ironically, is more chill and laid back, but the hotter side is a lot more metal based. That doesn't mean you should scoff at this zone though, as the generations of the enemies can be pretty fucking bad sometimes. Sometimes when you spawn in, there's just like half the enemies are all coming at you at once. It's pretty bad sometimes. Thankfully though, Zone 4 is very different. You have to dig through each wall to get to the next area with enemies, which can create more of a strategy-based gameplay style. This zone by far has the hardest enemies to deal with though, so you still have to be on your toes. Finally, we reach Zone 5, which has much more of a linear type feel to it, literally. There's a wire in the middle of the hallways and the rooms that makes your attacks electric, which will electrocute any enemy that it hits and can deal damage to the enemies around it. Some of the enemies here can be tough though. That's every zone, so let's get into the characters. There's a total of 18 different characters in the game, each of them having their own gimmicks that can make them harder or easier than the other characters. I'm going to go over them briefly, so some I'll be touching on more, but I'll split it into 3 categories. The base game characters, the DLC characters, and the actually hard characters. And when I mean hard, I mean hard. To start with the base game characters, we have Cadence, the standard character. She starts with a bomb, a basic diver, and a basic shovel. She has no upsides or downsides, and is the default character that every game pretty much has. She does, however, have a special fight at the end of the game. She has to fight Deadringer, who, upon defeating him, is revealed to be her father. He was under the NecroDancer's curse and was not in control of his body. Cadence and her father, now named Dorian, have to simultaneously fight the NecroDancer, the only time in the game where you control two characters at once. The NecroDancer fight, commonly referred to ND1, is a really hard one. The first time you get here, you are not going to survive. I won't really go over how much it works, so that's for you to find out. Completing this unlocks multiple characters, but I'm going to go a little bit off track and talk about the easier characters before the harder ones. Next up is Bard, the easiest character in the game. He doesn't care about the whole move to the rhythm staple of the game and just moves whenever he wants, pretty much a sandbox character. Everything else moves with him, so you need to be careful about how you approach every enemy. Next, let's talk about Dorian, Cadence's father. He moves 2 squares at once and is genuinely a pretty easy character. He starts with the Ring of Might, which is a flat +1 damage, so letting enemies come to him is generally a pretty good tactic. Next, let's talk about Melody, Cadence's mother. Being brought back to life through the golden loot, which you get during the ND1 fight, she must now use the loot across all zones and defeat enemies, before fighting the NecroDancer a second time in the ND2 fight. The loot doesn't attack physically, but rather opting to deal damage by moving adjacently to enemies. This can create some gameplay that is very different from most characters, completely changing the playstyle. Now let's talk about Eli, Cadence's grandfather. He doesn't have an arm, so he instead has to use infinite bombs to throw at enemies. This character, in my opinion, is pretty annoying to play as, but he's not that bad if you just think about what you're going to do next. Next up would be Reaper. Reaper is another really easy character. Everything she kills just becomes a little ghost that deals damage whenever anything touches it, but the ghosts move with you and can end up having some huge hitboxes later on in the run. The last character I'm going to talk about, though, is Dove. Dove is a pacifist who doesn't like the thought of killing things, so she brought a flower to confuse everything and get everything to run away from her. This character doesn't fight bosses and just teleports to the next zone. It can be pretty easy to get cornered in this character, so you're going to have to be paying attention to, like, literally everything around you. And that's all the base game characters. Getting into the DLC now, we're going to start to see a ramp up in the difficulty aspects for some of them. Amplified, along with adding Zone 5, adds 4 new characters, and the other DLC, Synchrony, adds 3 more. I'll go over 5 of them because the other 2 are in the other category. First, we have Nocturna. Nocturna is similar to Cadence in the fact that she has a special fight at the end, but her gameplay is very different. She has a spell that allows her to turn into a bat, which heals every 5 kills, but takes damage whenever you change back into a human. The bat form also has a stronger dagger-like weapon instead of whatever weapon that you currently have. Speaking of that weapon, she starts with a cutlass, which is in my opinion one of the best weapons in the entire game. She also has Zone 5 enemies sprinkled throughout every level, but usually they aren't that bad to deal with. Next is Diamond, who's pretty much free. The 2 differences that he has with Cadence is that he can move diagonally and there's no special NecroDancer fight at the end. He's no sweat if you've beaten characters like Cadence, so moving on to the Synchrony characters, first we have Clarinetta. Clary is a pretty tough character to get used to. She has a giant-ass sword that she can swing around through key combos. Chaunter is next, who is a flying ghost that can become anything it kills. A pretty cool concept for the character, but I didn't really have the best time with it. Finally is Suzu, another pretty tough character. She has a special weapon that whenever you kill an enemy with it, you get shot forward all the way to the other side of the room. She can be especially difficult in places like Zone 3, which is very open and can lead to a terrible spot in a very short time. Those are all the DLC characters though, so let's get into the actually hard ones. Yeah, those characters are all pretty tough in their own right, but compared to what's next, they're merely a warm-up. First, let's go over Bolt. Bolt is a character that starts with a spear and is normal in every other aspect of the gameplay, but the only thing is, they move at twice the speed. Bolt's gameplay can get so fast to where you can barely tell what's happening, like in the death metal fight. Next, let's talk about Monk. I really don't like Monk. He starts off with a blood shovel, and his entire gimmick is that you cannot pick up a single bit of gold. And every single enemy in the entire game drops 1 gold, at least 1 gold, whenever you're Monk. Not even a life potion can save you from it. The kind of gameplay that you're used to at this point, where you can just walk into the gold with no consequence, like brainlessly, it's just burned into your head subconsciously, and it's a really hard habit to change once you get used to it. Thankfully though, he got buffed. He only used to start with 2 health. He is able to get 1 item from the shop for free though, so it's pretty nice. Next up, we have Tempo. Tempo is a pretty tough one, though at face value it doesn't even seem like it would be the case. He can insta-kill every enemy, which is a perk, but the issue is that there's enemies from other zones in every zone, and there's a lot of them, and you have to kill one of them at least every 17 beats, or else you will instantly die. Shops are pretty much useless for this character, as anytime you try to get into one, you will 99% of the time die just trying to get in there. Next up, we have Mary. If you've played the game before, first of all, thanks for watching this even though you already know about the game, and second, If you're in the game's Discord server, you would know how much I don't like Mary. Mary starts with a spear and 6 cookies, which is pretty nice, but she also has this little bastard behind her. Marv, the lamb, follows Mary's every step and won't hesitate to die at every chance he fucking gets. Big deal though, right? Her lamb dies, so what? Well, if Marv dies, you're likely to follow him very closely after. Every single beat, you take more and more damage, which will literally just kill you after, like, a couple beats. I hate this character so fucking much. She was definitely the least fun that I've ever had playing the game. But finally though, we get to the last character on the list, Arya. This is Melody's mother, who originally fell for the NecroDancer's trap, which ended up being her demise, until Melody brought her back through the loot. Arya is the most hardcore character. She dies immediately upon missing a single beat, has half a heart the entire game, and cannot pick up any weapon that's not the dagger. She, along with a couple other characters, has a remix of the game's OST, which in this case is a metal remix, which can have some real fucking bangers sometimes. She begins her run in 5-1 instead of 1-1, and ascends up the zones in reverse order. At the end, she fights her own special boss, which I'm not going to spoil here. But that's every character. Each of them have their own reasoning as to being difficult, and some are miles harder than others. Actually, wait a second. How many did I name? 1, 2, only 17? Am I missing one? Oh, right. The final character in this game is leagues harder than any other character in this game. Hell, any game ever. This character is so undescribably hard that this one character's completion, on average, takes most players over 300 hours of solely playing them to complete. And that character is Kota. Kota is the final character in the game, unlocked after completing an all-characters run, where you beat all the first 9 characters in the game in one run, which is already really hard. It's a feat of its own. Kota is a combination of 3 characters, and they just so happen to be some of the hardest characters in the entire game. Monk, Bolt, and Arya all come together and decided, let's make the hardest fucking character possible, and out came Kota. You cannot touch any gold, you cannot use anything but the basic dagger, you're always one hit, you play at double the speed, and you cannot miss a single beat. At the time of writing this, I would call myself good at the game, but I haven't even completed all characters yet. I've completed Arya one time, and that's it. Looking ahead into the future and seeing Kota in my path is something terrifying, as the amount of people who have actually completed this character is so low for how many people have actually played the game, you wouldn't believe it. You wanna know the worst part though? Kota isn't even the final challenge. Remember the all characters run? It's pretty hard on its own, but what if we made it 10 times harder? The hardest achievement in the entire game, and possibly in every single game ever made, is Lowest of the Low. Lowest of the Low is most people's final achievement, and for good reason. You have to complete an all 9 character run, because there's also 13 character that you can do for another achievement, low percent. What does low percent entail? Let me show you. You cannot use any shrines. You cannot pick up any items. You cannot use anything that is not in your base loadout for each character. You cannot heal throughout the entirety of the run. This achievement is leagues harder than Kota, and I don't think that any other skill-based achievement in any game is harder than this one. Good job, Brace Yourself Games. You created the hardest game of all time. And you want to know the best part? Synchrony isn't even finished. There's still more to come. Crypt of the NecroDancer is without a doubt the hardest game ever made in my mind, and I would absolutely recommend you play it. This game can be extremely demotivating at times, like during Lowest of the Low or Kota runs, but the feeling you get when you finally beat something like this is genuinely unmatched in the over 10 years experience of playing games that I've had. Not to toot my own horn, but I've done some pretty crazy shit in games, but it just doesn't even come close to comparing with Crypt. Playing this game casually is also just a pretty great experience, and I would just overall recommend it to completionists or casual players. In any case, thank you for listening to me rambling for
14 minutes and 14 seconds
about Crypt, and until we meet again, see ya.